The 2025 Nuremberg movie tells the story of Nuremberg Trial, mostly from the point of view of Dr. Douglas Kelly, portrayed by Rami Malek, a psychiatrist tasked with making sure that the captured Nazi didn't kill themselves before the Allies killed them by hanging. By the way, if you haven't watched the movie, this video will have a lot of spoilers, so this is your warning to click away. The movie is a psychological thriller with a few jokes here and there, and I found it to be very well done. The psychological aspect of the trial inevitably intertwined with the Nuremberg trial, as Dr. Kelly is asked to spy on Reichsmarshal Hermann Göring, Hitler's second in command, portrayed by Russell Crowe in the movie, and report back to the prosecution. This is a very interesting aspect of the movie. The Nuremberg trials were done on a very shaky ground. There was no legal precedent for the convicting war criminals by an international court. International law was at its infancy, and at the same time, the Allies wanted to have a clear cut with the past. They clearly wanted to eradicate Nazism and inflict capital punishment on the highest in command, but they needed to do it in a way that looked democratic. In other words, they could not just be as barbaric as the Nazi, they needed a trial. On the hindsight, it seems obvious to us that the Allies would have won the trial, but at the time, they were not so sure to have enough legal standing to convict Göring and the others. In this video, I'll talk about the Nuremberg trial, how much the movie is a good representation of the facts, and what Nuremberg represents for modern international law. The Nuremberg trials were international criminal trials held by France, the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, and the United States against leaders of defeated Nazi Germany for plotting and carrying out invasions of several countries across Europe and committing atrocities against their citizens in the Second World War. Between 20 November 1945 and 1st of October 1946, France, the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, and the United States agreed to convene a joint tribunal in Nuremberg, occupied Germany, and formed the International Military Tribunal to put to trial 22 of the most important surviving leaders of Nazi Germany on political, military, and economic spheres. The plan for the trial started in early 1942 when representatives of 9 governments in exile from German-occupied Europe issued a declaration to demand an international court to try the German crimes committed in occupied countries. The United States and the United Kingdom refused to endorse this proposal, citing the failure of war crimes prosecutions following World War I. In addition, many were resistant because Nazi leaders followed orders and didn't do anything illegal at the time. We will see that these are the same criticism that the Nuremberg trials will encounter as well. As World War II was ending, the Allies met at the London Conference held from 26 June to 2nd of August 1945, with representatives of France, the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, and the United States negotiated the form that the trial would take. Until the end of the negotiation, it was not clear that any trial will be held at all. The offenses that would be prosecuted were crimes against peace, crimes against humanity, and war crimes. War crimes already existed in international law at the time as criminal violation of the laws and custom of war, but this did not apply to the government treatment of its own citizen. Because of these reasons, a new legal concept was developed to try crimes against German citizens, such as the German Jews and all other marginalized populations. The Soviets proposed a charge of crimes against civilians, which was later renamed Crimes Against Humanity, at the suggestion of Supreme Court Justice Robert Jackson, portrayed by Michael Shannon in the movie. The final definition for crimes against humanity was murder, extermination, enslavement, deportation, and other inhumane acts committed against any civilian population. The final version of the charter limited the tribunal's jurisdiction over crimes against humanity to those committed as part of a war of aggression. This distinction was important for both the US and its Jim Crow system of racial segregation and the Soviet Union and its gulags. In other words, inhuman treatment of one citizen is okay until a country decides to invade another country. The Charter appended the traditional view of international law by holding individuals rather than states responsible for breaches. This is absolutely monumental. Until that time, individuals were never held accountable for their actions in relation to international law. And this decision has shaped the face of international law ever since. In addition to that, the Nuremberg Charter prevented the defendant from claiming sovereign immunity, which is a legal principle that says that a state or a government cannot be sued or prosecuted without its consent. And also, the Nuremberg Charter stated that the plea of acting under a superior order was not a valid defense. Jackson wanted to extend the trial to Italy and Japan, the other countries part of the Axis with Germany, but the other allies preferred to limit the trial to Germany. The negotiators decided that the tribunal's permanent seat will be in Berlin, while the trial will be held at the Palace of Justice in Nuremberg. Nuremberg was a symbolic location. It was located in the American occupied zone, and it was the site of Nazi rallies. The Palace of Justice was relatively intact but needed to be renovated for the trial due to bomb damage. It had an attached prison where the defendants could be held. The renovation and the prison are shown in the movie. Jackson was appointed as the United States Chief Prosecutor. The historian Kim Christian Premiel described him as a versatile, remarkable orator, if not a great legal thinker. In the movie, Jackson is a crucial character. He's very involved in getting the trial started and in prosecuting Goering. However, at the crucial time of dismantling Goering's defense, he fumbles a little and is outshone by his British colleague David Maxwell Fyfe, portrayed by Richard Grant in the movie. There were other judges and prosecutors from the Soviet Union and France, but they never talk in the movie, so let's just move on. Some of the most prominent Nazis, Adolf Hitler, Erich Himmler, and Joseph Goebbels, had died by suicide, and therefore they could not be tried. The prosecutors aimed to prosecute whoever remained as key leader of the Third Reich. Most of the defendants had surrendered to the United States or the United Kingdom, which is also where the movie starts, with the surrender of Goering. Other defendants portrayed in the movie are Rudolf Hess, Boulder von Schirach, Julius Streicher, and Erich Raeder. I'm probably not saying any of this correctly, and I am very sorry. Former Nazis were allowed to serve as counsel, and they jointly appealed to the court, claiming the court did not have jurisdiction against the accused, but this motion was rejected. Not to defend the Nazi here, but on a strict legal point, the defendants were technically right. There are many things at play, but I want to focus on one basic principle. In modern international law courts, there is the principle of consent to the jurisdiction, also called state consent in international law, which means that under international law, a state can only be judged or legally bound by an international court or tribunal if it has consented to that court's jurisdiction. This is a very special principle of international law. In real life, nothing works like this. Imagine if tomorrow I rob a bank and then I say, I do not consent to be tried by this jury. I do not recognize its jurisdiction. It will be chaos, but this is how international law works. And therefore, for the Nuremberg trial to be working strictly under international law, Germany should have consented to the Nuremberg trial before the beginning of the war, which clearly it hasn't done. This is not a fringe interpretation. Many consider the Nuremberg trials to be technically in contrast with international law. Still, there was an exceptionally strong political desire to conduct the trials at the time, and therefore the trials were conducted nonetheless. And just to clarify, again, not condoning the Nazi in any way, I like to talk about what is technically correct from the legal point of view because I'm a nerd, but trying the Nazis at Nuremberg was definitely the right thing to do from a moral standpoint. Back to the trial. In the movie, we only see Goering pleading not guilty, but in reality, in the trial, all defendants pleaded not guilty. And Jackson in the trial made clear that the purpose extended beyond convicting the defendants. Prosecutors wanted to assemble irrefutable evidence of Nazi crimes, establish individual responsibility, establish the crime of aggression in international law, and provide a history lesson to the defeated Germany. This is a theme that is somehow discussed in the movie. Dr. Kelly studies Goering to understand what makes him and the other Nazi so different from other people and what made it possible for them to commit such incredible atrocity. I'm skipping a little bit ahead to the end of the movie, but Dr. Kelly figures out that the Nazis are just normal people and what happened in Germany can happen again in any other part of the world, even in the United States.
It's what Hitler and Goering did, and it is textbook. And if you think the next time it happens, we're going to recognize it because they're wearing scary uniforms, you're out of your damn mind.
In November 1945, as also shown in the movie, the prosecution screened a film titled Nazi Concentration and Prison Camps. The film, compiled from footage of the liberation of Nazi concentration camps, shocked both the defendants and the judges who adjourned the trial. Nuremberg, the movie, showed 6 minutes of the actual footage shown during the trial, and the tension in the movie theater was palpable. As a 21st century audience, we have been familiarizing with the concept of the Holocaust multiple times. Personally, I visited a concentration camp as part of a school trip when I was in high school. This is all part of our collective memory, and still those images were pretty shocking. I cannot imagine what the people present in Nuremberg might have felt at the time seeing those same images for the very first time. Probably the most interesting part of the movie is when Goering is cross-examined by the US and the UK prosecutors. In the scene, Goering claims to have not known anything about the concentration camps, and when he is presented with a document about an alleged final solution for the Jewish problem, he states it's a mere translation issue. What the document talks about is actually a total solution, and it refers to emigrating all Jewish people outside of Germany. Translation problems were indeed occurring during the trial, considering that all documents needed to be translated into English, French, Russian, and German at least. Here is where Jackson fumbles a little and the British colleague 5 takes the lead and pretty much says, okay, let's say you've never heard about a concentration camp, but now you know about it, you saw the footage, like all of us saw them. Would you still have followed Hitler?
Knowing what we know now, knowing what happened to 6 million Jews, I have to ask, would you still follow the Führer, Adolf Hitler? Yeah. I would.
And this is mic drop. Prosecution wins, case closed. This is the climax of the movie, but obviously the case was much longer. The trial lasted 218 days, and Goering's defense alone was between the 8th and the 22nd of March 1946. There is some stuff that is quite similar and some other stuff that was very dramatized in the movie, as it's normal. It is reported that during the actual trial, Goering often communicated his opinion about the proceeding using gesture and shaking his head or laughing. He constantly took notes, whispered with the other defendants, and during breaks in the proceedings, Goering trying to dominate the other defendants, so much so that he was eventually placed in solitary confinement when he attempted to influence the testimony. During the movie, Dr. Kelly is shown doing a lot of tests on Goering, and he says that he's very intelligent with a narcissistic personality. It is reported that Goering actually did have multiple tests during his imprisonment with a reported IQ of 138. Goering told American psychiatrist Leo Gundelson, not portrayed in the movie, that the court was stupid to try little fellas like Funk and Kaltenbrunner instead of letting Goering take all the blame on himself. He also claimed that he had never heard of most of the other defendants before the trial. So, yeah, narcissist checks out. It is reported that Goering found the contents of the film on the concentration camps shocking, and he said that the films must have been faked. Goering was the OG Holocaust denialist. When testifying on his own behalf, Goering emphasized his loyalty to Hitler and claimed to know nothing about what had happened in the concentration camps, which were under Himmler's control. He provided evasive, convoluted answers to direct questions and had plausible excuses for all of his actions during the war. He used the witness stand as a venue to expound at great length on his own role in the Third Reich, attempting to present himself as a peacemaker and diplomat before the outbreak of the war. Historical sources report that during the cross-examination, Chief Prosecutor Jackson read the minutes of a meeting and Goering's signature, so that part is quite similar to the scene in the movie. However, it is also reported that later, the British prosecutor, presented evidence that Goering must have known about the killing of 15 Armenians who had been recaptured after escaping. He also presented evidence that Goering knew about the extermination of the Hungarian Jews. So the mic drop moment in the movie might not have played exactly like we saw. Goering was found guilty on all 4 counts and was sentenced to death by hanging. The judgment stated, "There is nothing to be said in mitigation, for Goering was often, indeed almost always, the moving force, second only to his leader. He was the leading war aggressor, both as political and as a military leader. He was the director of the slave labor program and the creator of the oppressive program against the Jewish and other races at home and abroad." All of these crimes had, as frankly admitted. On some specific cases, there may have been conflict of testimony, but in terms of the broad outline, his own admission are more than sufficiently wide to be conclusive of his guilt. His guilt is unique in his enormity. The record discloses no excuses for this man. Just as it's shown in the movie, the night before the scheduled hanging, Goering committed suicide with a potassium cyanide capsule. The movie doesn't say at all how he could have got the cyanide, so I left the movie theater very curious about it. This is what I found online. Since he was gathered around the clock, it was not clear how Goering obtained the poison. At the time, speculation centered on whether he had access to a jar of his hair cream where another cyanide capsule was later found. Decades later, another theory focused on a U.S. Army Lieutenant, Jack Willis, who had been stationed at the trials but who had since died. Goering had given Willis his gold watch, pen, and cigarette case, and so it was theorized that Willis had retrieved the capsule from their hiding place among Goering's confiscated personal effects and then passed them along. In 2005, former U.S. Army Private Herbert Lee Stevens, who served in the 1st Infantry Division, 26th Infantry Regiment, the honor guard for the Nuremberg Trial, claimed that he gave Goering a medicine hidden inside a fountain pen that a young German woman had asked him to smuggle into the prison. In explaining his decision to speak out 60 years later, Stevens said that he was convinced to come forward by his daughter. He wanted to set the record straight. He thought that he was just offering medicine. He said that he did not know about the cyanide until after the suicide. So this seemed to be the most plausible, but we never know for sure. As the old saying goes, history is written by the winners. The International Military Tribunal agreed with the prosecution, condemning the defendants and stating that Germany's aggression was the gravest charge, stating in its judgment that because war is essentially an evil thing, to initiate a war of aggression, therefore, is not only an international crime, it is the supreme international crime, differing only from other war crimes in that it contains within itself the accumulated evil of the whole. They used pretty harsh words there. However, the judges were aware that both the Allies and the Axis had planned or committed acts of aggression, so the judges had to be very careful in writing the verdict to avoid discrediting the Allied governments. In addition, several criticisms were made against the Allies because other events would have granted prosecution under the Nuremberg Charter. For example, the violent suppression of anti-colonial uprising would have been deemed illegal according to the definition of international crimes in the Nuremberg Charter, but no state have ever been held accountable for its colonial past in front of international tribunal, and this is deeply hypocritical. Another controversy resulted from trying defendants for acts that were not criminal at the time, particularly crimes against peace and the aforementioned crimes against humanity, which was codified in the Nuremberg Charter. This contravenes the principle of non-retroactivity of law, also called the prohibition on ex post facto laws, which means that a person cannot be punished for something that was legal at the time they did it. Law must be clear, predictable, and apply only going forward. As I was saying before, technically I agree with this criticism, but I still consider the Nuremberg trial necessary. In terms of its legacy, the International Military Tribunal and its charter marked the true beginning of international criminal law. The trial has met a mixed reception ranging from glorification to condemnation, and the reaction was initially more negative but slowly became more and more positive over time. The Nuremberg Trials is fundamental to modern international law, establishing that individuals, including leaders, are accountable for war crimes and crimes against humanity, leading to the concept of individual responsibility under international law, and they created key terms like crime against humanity. In 1945, at the same time of the Nuremberg Charter, also the United Nations Charter was drafted, and the result of the Nuremberg trial helped shape the future of the United Nations, with treaties codifying principles that were discussed in the Nuremberg Charter and during the trial. For example, the Genocide Convention and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. In addition, several tribunals have been created under the auspice of the United Nations. For example, the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia and the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda and the Permanent International Criminal Court. These tribunals are modeled over the Nuremberg trial. Unfortunately, there is still a lot of limitation in international law. The first and most fundamental problem is that international law depends on state consent. Unlike domestic law, there is no world government with automatic authority of a state. The United Nations have very little control over this. Countries are only bound by international law if they agree to be bound. That means a state can choose whether or not to sign a treaty, make reservation that weakens this obligation, or even withdraw entirely. For example, the United States is not part of the International Criminal Court. This means that whatever the United States do, no country can attempt to hold them accountable, whether they invade another country or, I don't know, kidnap the president of another country. Just examples.
No! No! Shame! Shame! Oh my God! What the What the
Second, the enforcement of international law is equally weak. This is no global police force to arrest states or leaders. Compliance depends largely on good faith, diplomatic pressure, or economic sanctions. As a result, violation of international law often go unpunished. If you made it till here, thank you so much. My name is Julia. I'm a certified anti-money laundering specialist. In this channel, I usually talk about anti-money laundering, but today I decided to talk about international law. And the reason is that international law has a very important place in anti-money laundering. Anti-money laundering law ultimately are influenced by international law. I talk more about this topic in another video about the Financial Action Task Force, which I am leaving you linked somewhere here and in the description box. If you like this video, comment, like, subscribe, all of the usual stuff, and I'll see you on the next one.